Think about the first time they did something that made you pause. It wasn't a blow-up, and it wasn't some massive betrayal that would make headlines. It was probably something so small you felt petty even thinking about it. Maybe they made a joke about your career in front of your friends, or they forgot a boundary you'd spent an hour explaining the night before. You felt that tiny sting, that little nick in your confidence, but you let it go. You told yourself, I'm not going to ruin the night over one comment. But see, that's the trap. There is an old, dark term for this kind of gradual destruction. It's called death by 1,000 cuts. The idea is that you aren't taken down by one big, fatal blow. Instead, you're weakened by hundreds of tiny, microscopic nicks. On their own, a single paper cut won't kill you. You put a bandage on it and move on. But when someone is cutting you once a day, every day, for years, eventually, you start to bleed out. You don't even realize how much of you has drained away until you try to stand up and realize you don't have the strength left to move. Well, look, they didn't cross the line all at once, they just moved the line an inch at a time so your eyes never had a chance to adjust to the distance. A predator doesn't walk up to a door and kick it down, that's how you get caught. No, they pick the lock, one pin at a time. They know that if they showed you the final version of who they really are on the first date, you'd have been gone before the appetizers arrived. So, they use the 1% rule. They push just far enough to see if you'll push back. If you don't, that new territory becomes theirs. They aren't looking for a fight, they are looking for your silence. They are waiting for the moment you start making excuses for them so they don't have to make them for themselves. So, are you telling, you started to feel like you were losing your mind over things that seemed too small to mention? Let's slow this down, because this is where the 1,000 cuts really start to sting. This is the stage of the microviolation. See, in a healthy relationship, if you tell someone, hey, it really bothers me when you vent your work stress at me the second I walk through the door, a normal person says, my bad, I'll give you some space. But a manipulator? Well, look, they don't just ignore the boundary. They test the perimeter. They wait 3 days, and then they do it again, but this time, they frame it as an emergency. They want to see if the rule you set is solid, or if it's made of sand. Well, look, it's a calculated game of inches. They are looking for the micro-concession. That's the moment where you feel that flash of annoyance, but you decide to swallow it because you don't want to be the nag or the sensitive one. Are you saying, you started to notice that every time you sat down to do something for yourself, maybe a hobby or just catching up with a friend, they suddenly had a crisis that required your immediate attention? That wasn't bad luck. That was a cut. They were testing to see if they could successfully interrupt your autonomy without you calling them out on it. They are training you, bit by bit, to prioritize their chaos over your peace. Alright, look, the most dangerous part of these micro-violations is how they use them to build a case file against you. When you finally do snap, when the 400th tiny cut finally hits a nerve and you raise your voice, they sit back with that calm, cool look on their face and say, wow, where is all this coming from? You're being so irrational. And in that moment, they win. They've successfully shifted the focus from their months of boundary pushing to your one moment of reactive exhaustion. They make you feel like you are the one who crossed the line, when in reality, they've been moving the line toward you for half a year. Are you telling, you started apologizing for your own reactions to their disrespect? That is the 500th cut. That is the moment where the erosion has gone so deep that you've lost track of where their behavior ends and your responsibility begins. They want you to believe that if you were just better, or more patient, or less dramatic, these little things wouldn't happen. But the truth is, the little things are the whole point. They are the bricks they are using to build the wall that's slowly cutting you off from the rest of the world, and from yourself. So, are you telling, you eventually stopped even noticing the cuts? Very interesting. Let's slow this down, because this is the normalization phase. This is when the abnormal becomes your everyday reality. See, once they've moved the line an inch at a time for long enough, you lose your original map. You forget where the boundary used to be. You start to think, well, this is just how relationships are, or they're just having a stressful month, for the 12th month in a row. Well, look, they are watching for the moment your internal alarm stops going off. Are you saying, you found yourself defending their behavior to your friends? Or worse, to yourself? That's the goal of the 1000 cuts. They don't want you to stay shocked, they want you to stay numb. They want to see if they can make their disrespect feel like a quirk of their personality rather than a violation of yours. They're testing to see if you'll start to self-soothe by lowering your expectations until they're sitting on the floor. Alright, look, it's a silent victory for them when you stop asking for an apology because you already know it's not coming. You've been cut so many times that the scar tissue is starting to take over, and they're sitting back, realizing they don't even have to hide the blade anymore. They've successfully recalibrated your sense of normal to include their toxicity. You aren't fighting back anymore, you're just trying to survive the day. And that's exactly where they want you, too tired to realize that the person you're protecting is the one holding the knife. So, are you telling, you finally hit a wall where you couldn't take one more tiny comment? Okay. Let's look at this closer, because this is the moment of impact. This is the part of the 1000 cuts where the blood loss finally makes you dizzy. See, they've spent months, maybe years, shaving off little pieces of your dignity, and they've gotten so comfortable doing it that they've stopped being careful. They think you're permanently numbed out. They think the scar tissue is thick enough that they can start taking bigger swings. Well, look, this is usually when they do something so undeniably over the line that even you can't make an excuse for it. It's the blatant lie, the public humiliation, or the moment they show total indifference when you're actually in a crisis. Well, look, the shock of that moment is usually followed by a terrifying realization, you don't recognize the person in the mirror anymore. Are you saying, you looked back at who you were before this relationship started and realized that person would never have tolerated even one of these cuts? That's the impact. It's the weight of 1000 tiny betrayals hitting you all at once. It's not just about the last thing they did, it's about the cumulative debt of every single time you swallowed your pride to keep the peace. You realize that the peace was a lie. You weren't maintaining a relationship, you were just financing their power trip with your own soul. Alright, look, this is the most dangerous time for you, because they can feel the shift. They can feel you waking up. And what do? They reach for the first cut again. They try to pull you back into the cycle by acting like the person they were on day one. They become sweet, they become helpful, they finally understand what you've been saying. But are you telling, you can see the blade behind their back now. That's the difference. Once the impact happens, the invisibility of the cuts disappears. You start to see every passive-aggressive remark, every accidental slight, and every moving goalpost for exactly what it is, a weapon. They are watching to see if the impact was enough to make you leave, or if they can just put a temporary bandage on the situation and wait for you to settle back into the numbness. They want to know if they've successfully broken your spirit, or if there's still enough of you left to fight for your life. Because that's what this is now, it's a fight for your reality. They didn't cross the line all at once, but now that you see where the line actually is, you have to decide if you're going to keep standing on their side of it, or if you're going to step back into the light. So, are you telling, you're still waiting for them to admit they've been holding the blade? Look, let's be real for a second. That apology isn't coming. They didn't accidentally trip and cut you 1,000 times. You don't slip and move a boundary an inch at a time by mistake. This wasn't a series of accidents, it was a strategy. They knew exactly how much you would bleed before you noticed the wound, and they timed every single nick to ensure you stayed exactly where they wanted you. All right. Let's look at the confusion you've been carrying. You think you're confused because the situation is complicated. But you're not. You're only confused because you're trying to find a good reason for bad behavior. You're trying to make sense of why someone who claims to love you would systematically dismantle who you are. Stop. There is no logic there. There is only a result. And the result is that you are smaller, quieter, and more tired than you were before they arrived. Whether that's been happening for weeks or for years doesn't change the fact that you're disappearing. Are you saying, you're worried about what happens if you stop adjusting? Well, look, the moment you stop moving the line back for them, the relationship as you know it ends. Because the relationship wasn't built on a connection, it was built on your concessions. It was built on your willingness to be cut and call it a graze. The death by 1,000 cuts only works if you stay still. It only works if you keep believing that the next cut will be the last one. But now you see the pattern. You see the blade. The fog of maybe they didn't mean it has evaporated, and all that's left is the truth of what's been done to you. You aren't sensitive. You aren't irrational. You are a person who has been slowly eroded, and today is the day the erosion stops. The cuts only have power as long as they stay invisible. Now that you see them, they're just scars. And scars are proof that you can survive. What you do with that proof is entirely up to you. If you decide to